Hello and welcome to Chapter 9, the chapter on stratification. I have to say, when people think of sociology, this is actually the chapter that they think about. What we focus on a lot in this discipline is why are some people rich and some people poor? What are some of the reasons behind that? We hear about in the news, we hear all kinds of people saying systemic racism and it's the system. So a lot of people ask, well, what does that mean, right? So we're going to talk about a little bit of that today in the chapter on race and also the chapter on gender issues. We'll explore that a little bit further, but this is a really good start for that. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start off with poverty, right? I mean that's something that happens in our world. So one of the things that we know is more women are in poverty than men, right? It's somewhere around 13% to 10.5%. The other thing that we know is very few married people live in poverty. Um, Single fathers live in poverty, but what your overhead says, it's something like 12.7% across the country. However, when we take a look at single moms living in poverty, that number is right at 25%. So that's a really high number, right? I mean, that's so one out of four moms in this country, single moms, is living in poverty, and the number for people living with a disability is just slightly higher than that. So poverty is something that's a lot more present in our society than maybe we think here in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. I want to start off today focusing on Native Americans, right? It's a group that isn't talked about very much. If anyone has family who lives on a reservation, which is government-owned land, so normally there's a couple exceptions to this in the country, but normally people um, are not able to own the land, which so you're not able to leverage that as an asset, which is let's have that conversation on another day. It'll just get me riled up. But let's start with Native Americans. In this country, let's start with a national number. About 66% of all adults own their own home, right? So that's significantly more than half, right? So 66% is somewhere in the two-thirds range. So two-thirds of adults own their own home. 56% of Native Americans do, right? So closer, significantly closer to half. The other thing I want to say with that is nearly one out of five Native American homes have inadequate plumbing. And so what that means is perhaps you're using, perhaps when you have to go to the bathroom or take a shower, you're going outside. Perhaps your water doesn't work at all. If you live in Schaumburg or Hoffman Estates or in any of the local suburbs, one of the things that you may or may not know is if your water is turned off for non-payment or for whatever reason, the house is condemned. You're not allowed to live there, right? So almost all villages have that ordinance. So if that were true on reservations, right? One out of five homes, not people, but one out of five homes with multiple people living there would be condemned. So this is a huge issue, and again, we don't see it very much, particularly here in Chicago, because this isn't it's just not a group that we see very often. So if we want people to live successful lives, they have to have adequate housing, right? Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, those base needs of home and food and safety. Those are core needs that people need to have, and we just don't see that consistently enough within Native American homes. Okay. Poverty by ethnicity. Native Americans, I don't know if top the list is the right way to say this, but Native Americans are the highest group living in poverty, followed by African Americans. So Native Americans' poverty rate is about one out of four. African American poverty rate is about one out of five. and Hispanic poverty rate is 17 to 18%. So, and then when we take a look at whites and Asians, we see 1 out of 10, right? We see about 10%. So, so we go from 1 out of 4, 25% poverty rate for Native Americans, and we go to 1 out of 10 for whites and Asians. So it's a significant difference. It's a significant difference. And so when people say systemic, right, what are the systemic issues? Look, I'll give you my take on Native Americans, and that is if you if you're not able to leverage the home that you live in terms of an asset financially, whether it's to get a second mortgage on your home, to lower a car payment, to pay off credit cards, to do all kinds of things that people just almost intuitively seem to do who own homes, you're going to have a higher poverty rate. And so we absolutely see that within Native American communities and African American communities. There's all kinds of, and we'll talk about this later this semester, all kinds of issues with being accepted for mortgages and what your race is. You would think in this day and age that we would be able to handle most of those things. And we're probably better, but having said that, there's still issues with it. So a couple things with stratification. First, some key elements are class. Anytime we're talking about upper class, middle class, and lower class, and today we're going to talk about underclass as well, we're talking about stratification. Look, we borrowed the term from geology, where you talk about strata, right? You can talk about strata in the atmosphere. You can talk about strata in geology. We can go back in time and see what happened to people who came and time periods before us simply by studying the strata within geology. And so we have taken that concept and we've implemented it within sociology. And so we take a look at where people fall within the economic and the socioeconomic range, and we call it stratification. So we talk about status and we also talk about power. Look, people with assets have power, right? I'll give you a real simple example. My children, when they were younger, if they needed assistance with tutoring, or, and I'm by no means a rich person, but if they needed assistance with tutoring or they wanted to be in art classes outside of school, I put them there, right? I mean, I paid for that. So, and I have more power to do that than someone who doesn't have the discretionary income to do that. And so power works itself in all kinds of ways. Give you another example. In Chicago, I think most of us, and you should be, most of us are familiar with the Robert Taylor homes, Cabrini Green. When we think about the great experiments when those were built, you had, well, let me ask you a question. How many people who lived on welfare who were African American do you think were consulted about the building of Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor? You already know the answer. It's zero. So you had people making decisions for thousands of other people who really didn't understand the issues that they were dealing with on a daily basis. And so if you would have went to anyone and said, "Hey, look, we're going to take as many people as we can who receive welfare and we're going to put them in the same building complex," I think most people would have said, "Are you out of your mind?" Right? I mean, this has bad news written all over it. But look, bureaucrats were looking at it as efficiency, right? Well, everybody's in the same spot, so we'll send social workers there and we'll send resources there. We'll just take care of everything in one fell swoop. That works nice on paper. It doesn't work real well in real life. And so that's power. So power is having a voice. Power is having a stake in what happens to your life. When you don't have the power to be at the table, when decisions are made about where you live and about what access to resources you have, you don't have power. And that's been one of the key issues that we've had in this country. So when people talk about systemic issues, systemic racism, this is the kind of thing that they're talking about. I wish the news would spend a little more time explaining this rather than just saying systemic, right? Wouldn't it be a lot more helpful if more people understood that? But this is the kind of thing we're talking about. So if you have power over your life, if so if you can make decisions, then that's great, right? I mean, isn't that part of the reason that you're going to college? You want as much control over your life as you can possibly have. Well, people that don't have power end up in really bad situations, right? Because other people make decisions for them. I know with me, even if I make a bad decision, I would much prefer that it be my decision, right? Because then I can own it. If I make a bad decision, and I've made plenty, when I make a bad decision, it's mine, right? It's no one else's. When someone else makes a decision for you and it's a bad decision, now you have all kinds of bad feelings that go along with that. Okay, there we go. There are three kinds of social stratification that I want you to understand, right? So we're going to talk about slavery, caste. I want you to be able to differentiate between those two, and class, right? So let's start with slavery. There's no way to say this other than just simply to say it. Slavery means that some people are property, right? Some people are owned by others. It's horrible, right? I mean, it's happened throughout history. It continues to be a huge issue in this country. I hear people say, oh, well, the Civil War was 150 years ago. And yeah, it was 150 years ago. We're still dealing with the repercussions from slavery 150 years later, right? I mean, in one breath, you can say 150 years is a long time. We're probably not going to live that long. I don't think I am. On the other hand, you can say that, boy, that wasn't long ago at all, right? Slavery in this country, particularly from people from Africa, lasted significantly longer than 150 years. So it's not surprising at all that we continue to deal with that. Let me ask you a question. Do we still have slavery in this country today, do you think? Should I pause and wait for somebody to raise their hand, even though this is going to be on YouTube? I did not make good coffee today. So, look, we do still have slavery today. And instead of asking a question that no one can answer, I will just tell you. So, the two groups most likely to end up in slavery today here in the United States are women and children. And just, hope it's not too early in the morning for you. They're placed into slavery for the same reason, prostitution. So, women and children who are forced into prostitution, it's a horrible way to live, right? So slavery means that someone is owned by someone else, um, and we still have it today. I'll also tell you this: my family's from South Carolina. When I was a Ute, right? When I was very young, we used to go every year to South Carolina, and we always went in August, right before school started. The worst possible time, by the way, to go to South Carolina, and because it's just hot. For those of you who have spent some time in the South, you understand what hot is. We think we know hot here. We have absolutely no idea. I mean, I remember walking from the air-conditioned house to the carport to get something out of the car and then back to the house. What is this, 10 seconds? You're drenched in sweat, right? I mean, it's just hot. So the South is hot. I remember as a child, I'm like 8 or 10 years old. We went to Charleston, which is just an absolutely gorgeous city, right? They still have some of the old brick streets, and just a gorgeous city. And we're walking along, and they had some people selling fruits and vegetables and peanuts and just all kinds of things. And not to draw this out, this was an old slave trading stadium, for lack of a better way to put it. And so when people, I know sometimes people in the northwest suburbs get upset and they say, "Oh, well, why are people wanting monuments torn down?" And it's not just monuments, and that's the piece. Here's the problem with the news: we don't spend enough time on topics. And look, you can't. I mean, they're trying. The news is really to sell commercials. It's not to inform us. We all know that, but we still get frustrated with it. it's not just monuments. There are still emblems of implements also of slavery that are still present. And why do these things still continue to exist, right? Um, so when you hear people say some of these things, I want to give you a little bit more information so you can put it in a little better context about what's actually happening. Okay. A caste system is different. So in slavery, you are property, and it's also a closed system. And what I mean by that is if you're born a slave, you will die a slave, right? It's a closed system. You're not just, it's not that you hit 21 and oh, I can go to the bars and I'm free, right? I mean, that's not what we're talking about at all. Oh, and sorry for those of you turning 21, you can't even go to the bars right now. So if you're watching this and we're still in shelter in place, sorry about that. The caste system is also a closed system. We still have caste systems in several countries on this planet. And what I mean by a closed system is if you are born a peasant farmer, you will die a peasant farmer. That is your lot in life, and there's really nothing you can do to change it. If you were born into royalty, you will die royalty. You can be the world's worst person, the world's dumbest person, if there is such a thing. Having said that, you're still going to be royalty, right? So it is a closed system. There's all kinds of rules about who can talk to whom, and who can marry whom, and all these different things. In India still has locations. It has a caste system. That not to go too far into it in a 101 class, but the name Patel comes to mind with that. Um, I want to talk about Nepal though, Kathmandu. So I went to college. I went to grad school with two gentlemen from Nepal. I was in grad school for 2 years. The first year, we had a young man, Kush, from Nepal. Just a fabulous guy, right? Just an absolutely fabulous guy. We were in our early 20s. There were several of us who were graduate assistants, grad asses, as we said back in the day, and he was probably mid 40s, right? But he was, I mean, he didn't go when we went to study at the bars. He didn't go with us, but but the rest of the time we hung out, we took the same classes. He was just a tremendous guy. Second year, a new gentleman from Nepal came to who was also a graduate assistant in sociology, and it was a little different because we saw the interaction, we meaning, the United States students. There were seven of us, and I think three were from the US and four were international, or reverse that, maybe four from the US and three international. Anyway, I don't remember, it's way too long ago. But we noticed that Kush, the first gentleman from Nepal, when he would talk to the newer gentleman from Nepal, he would do anything the guy asked. Our offices were on the third floor of a building without an elevator, poor planning, and the soda machine was in the basement. So if the new guy wanted a soda, he would say to Kush, he would say, "Hey, here's however much sodas were back then, a nickel." No, I don't know how much they were, 50 cents, a dollar, whatever. But he would give Kush the change, and then Kush would happily run down four flights of stairs, because we're the third floor and you have to go to the basement. So he runs down four flights of stairs, runs up four flights of stairs, and we saw this a lot. And so the American students, we sat down with Kush one day and we just said, "What's going on, right? I mean, you can't do enough to please this guy." He says, "No, no, no." He says, "You don't understand." He said, "In my culture, he's royalty, right? I mean, he lives in the castle in Kathmandu." And he said, I don't." So he explained that for him to ask me to do something is an honor. So we, of course, in our naivete, we said, "Well, you're in the United States now. You don't have to do this." He's like, "Look, just stop." He said, "You don't get it." He said, "When I graduate, I'm going home, right? I'm going back into that culture. I'm going back into that society. Just, it's no big deal." And so But this is a system where people are in different castes, and one person happened to be in a significantly higher caste than the other one. Okay. Class. Here in the United States, we have a class system. And so, look, I mean, the advantage to the class system is there's more movement between people who are rich and people who are poor and the middle class, right? There's significantly more movement. There's probably not as much movement as we would like there to be. In this country, for the most part, if you're born rich, you'll stay rich. And if you're born poor, you're more likely to stay poor. And if you're born middle class, you're more likely to stay there. Money, assets, we talked about this in chapter one, gives us life chances, right? When we were talking about Emil Durkheim, right? I mean, anyway, life chances. And so money gives us that. Assets give us that. Owning stocks and multiple homes gives us that. We can leverage those things for better opportunities. We can leverage those for a loan. We can leverage those to go to college. We can leverage those to purchase a business. So again, when we were talking to start this conversation about Native Americans, many not being able to own their own homes, that's a leverage that they're unable to use later on in life. And so that decreases their life chances. And so again, people with assets have more life chances. And what I mean by life chances, I'll just give you my take on it. How many times can you screw up and land on your own feet? Right? I mean, that's kind of how many life chances you have. And the more assets you have, the more times you can screw up. People you have friends who have gone to college and flunked out, and then their parents just pay for them to go someplace else, right? Wouldn't that be awesome? I wish everyone in the class had the rich uncle that you didn't know, so that when he died, it's not a big deal, right? But he leaves you all kinds of money so that you can go to college and buy a nice car and go on nice vacations. Wouldn't that just be awesome? For most of us, and I'm included in this, for most of us that was not an option, right? We had to scrimp and save and work jobs. And how many people are working right now while you're also going to college, right? Almost everybody on this call. So it's hard, right? It's harder. And so it's easier to go to college if you don't have to work. Look, who's more likely to become a medical doctor? Um, person A grows up, lower middle class, maybe poor. They've worked their way through school. They're working late at night. But they're pulling themselves, right? This is the saying, they pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. So that's person A. That's the person we love to talk about. Person B, however, their parents just pay for it, right? So they go to college, they get a car, they get a nice apartment. If they need a new computer, the parents just go on Amazon and buy them one, or Newegg. That's what I use. But anyway, so which person is more likely to become a medical doctor? And it's not even close. The person with the money is more likely to become a medical doctor. I'm not saying the other doesn't happen. Don't freak out on that. I'm just saying the numbers between the two are just not close. It's hard to work and go to college, as many of you know. And I'll say this, I'll say it in the last conversation. It doesn't matter how long it's going to take each of you to go to college, just finish, right? Just finish. No employer is going to care if it took you 6 or 7 years instead of 4. Who cares? No one cares. People just want to know that you have a degree and what's your experience, right? I mean, that's really all they care about. What are you bringing to the table? So please don't get frustrated with school, particularly right now with COVID. Just keep going. If you can only afford to take a class or two at a time, take a class or two at a time, right? Stick with it. If there's, I run into former students all the time. Well, not right now, but normally I run into former students all the time, and I love hearing the stories of how successful people are. I have former students that are faculty here at Harper. It's awesome. I also run into students who say things like, yeah, I took a semester off. this is a terrible analogy, but I want you to get it. Semesters are like potato chips, right? You don't eat just one. And so what many students do is they think, oh, I'm just going to take a semester off. I have things going on in my personal life. I have things going on at home. Here's the problem. Before you even know it, 3 years go by, right? I mean, before you even know it. And then you start thinking things like, oh, I'm too old now. And no, you're not. Look, here at Harper, the average student here is 29 years old. You would never know that at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, right? When we're back in school physically. But look, we have web classes, which I think you know now. We have evening classes, we have weekend classes. I've taught a Saturday morning class for 30 years, for crying out loud, right? And so I always have a mix of students in that class, but I typically have some older students. They're working, right? I mean, their free time to go to college is the weekend. So I love teaching that class. Just, I love interacting with people who are pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, and I love to see it. So hang in there. It's worth it. I'll also tell you this. Some of the happiest moments of my life outside of the birth of my children, some of the happiest moments of my life are when I have walked up a set of stairs and someone has shaken my hand and given me a diploma. Those are moments you can never take away, right? Because look, when you graduate from Harper and then wherever it else is you go, U of I or Northern or Illinois State or Stanford, wherever it is that you go, you will put that on your resume for the rest of your life. So stick with it, right? I know it's difficult right now. I know there's so much anxiety going on right now. Stick with it. You're really going to appreciate that. All right. All right. I jumped ahead several. Again, these web lectures, I really try to just hit the highlights. I want to talk about the underclass. This is the group beneath the lower class. So this is the group that's kind of on the edge of poverty, maybe has a job, poverty, maybe has a job. These are people, unfortunately, who at the moment don't have a lot of competitive job skills. So they end up in part-time, no benefit jobs. And look, you're going to have a broom in your hand. And there's nothing wrong with these jobs. These are hardworking, these are good, hardworking people. It's very difficult in this situation to get ahead, right? It's very difficult. And so people in the underclass have a very difficult way to go, whether it just comes to healthcare, right? When President Obama and his team passed the Affordable Care Act several years ago, one of the things, and Illinois was a beneficiary of this, was they knew that not everyone was going to qualify for the Affordable Care Act. This wasn't a negative. People were going to get their health care through Medicaid, right? I mean, people 65 and older get their health care through Medicare. And if you have anyone in your family 65 or older, pretty likely they're going to say, you know what, I'm kind of happy with this. I mean, they could buy supplemental, complementary insurance, to cover more things that they want to do. But Medicaid has restrictions with healthcare, but it does give people access. What people in the underclass historically have done, and this is the poorest and the most expensive way to handle your healthcare, is they've used the emergency department, the emergency room as their healthcare. And first of all, you're not screening for diabetes, for heart issues, right? I mean, so you're just dealing with things when they become a problem. It's extremely expensive to go to the emergency room, and it's not good planning for the future. And so part of President Obama's team, part of the mission was, let's get people into the healthcare system so that they can start screening and planning for the future. An annual physical is a great idea. Get your blood pressure checked. Where is it? Get your sugar level, get your glucose checked, right? I mean, look, most adults who are over 40 awful lot of them have type 2 diabetes, right? And it's we have sugar everywhere in our diet. We have starch everywhere in our diet. And look, when you're 18 years old, you can live on Taco Bell potato chips and mac and cheese, right? My kids do. So you can do that when you're 18. When you're 45, you're not going to be in shape anymore if those are the things that you're eating, and your comorbid morbidity. Wow, your comorbidities start to go up, and so we've seen this with COVID-19. People with high blood pressure who are older, people with type 2 diabetes, people who are obese, their chance of death is significantly increased, right? And so so when people start to talk about systemic issues within healthcare, again, we hear the word systemic. This is what it means. It's access to healthcare outside of the emergency department, and it's what kind of foods are you eating. Look, good food that is healthy for us is expensive. The most expensive things that you can find at the grocery store are fresh meats, particularly if I love salmon, right? So fresh fish is going to be expensive. Fresh fruits and vegetables are going to be expensive, and they don't last very long. The cheaper things to buy in a store come in boxes and cans. And those are the things that raise your chance of having comorbidity issues, and type 2 diabetes, right? And so we're seeing this play out right now with COVID-19. And so, again, when we talk about systemic issues, I wish the news would explain this, but this is what they're talking about. It's not just our choice in terms of what we eat, it's what choices do we have, right? People who are in the underclass don't have discretionary income, and so they're not going to go hog wild, as it were, at the grocery store buying all kinds of fresh fruits and vegetables. They're going to purchase what they can afford, and that's going to cause health issues down the road. In the 70s, we started studying the difference between the rich and the poor, right? And one of the things that we found in the 80s, look, most people in sociology are liberal. I don't think that's a shock to anyone. And we kind of loved it in sociology at the end of the 80s. Most sociologists weren't big fans of Ronald Reagan, and and what we noticed in the 80s was that during the Reagan years, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And then in the 90s, we had Bill Clinton as president, and many sociologists couldn't wait to do the same kind of analysis because we wanted to show, many of us did, we wanted to show that, see, these policies work better. And that's not what we found. At the end of the 90s, we found that the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. That's what we found since we have started studying it. People who don't have things to leverage don't leverage things, and people who have things to leverage end up with more money. I mean, it's just kind of that simple. Even during COVID, the stock market has rebounded, right? So with what is it, 50 some million people have become unemployed. And with that, the stock market is going gangbusters right now, right? I think the Dow is somewhere around 28. So it's just absolutely, it's kind of mind blowing how that happens. But people with assets are able to leverage those assets even in a pandemic, right? And we've seen this play out before. There's two kinds of mobility that I want us to understand the difference between, intergenerational mobility and intra, right? Inter means, the prefix for the word is between two things. So intercollegiate athletics means one college plays another college. Intramurals means that people at the same college play against each other in recreational sports. Well, we mean the same thing with social mobility, right? So intergenerational mobility is how do you compare to your parents, to your grandparents, to others. Intra, where you start and where you finish, right? So, and as I was saying before, we see more mobility within a class system, but probably not the mobility that people hope for. We have a table in here which I absolutely love. It is an occupational prestige listing, and you're probably looking at it right now, and you can see that the number one job is U.S. Supreme Court Justice, right? Supreme Court Judge, and it's a great job because once you get it, it's a job for life. It pays very well, and you can be the crankiest jerk in the world. You're still going to be on the Supreme Court, right? So it's and think about what it takes to have it. So the jobs at the top of this occupational prestige ranking list, these jobs are jobs that require a lot of training and education, and they pay very well. The jobs in the middle of this, for example, police officer, these are jobs that have kind of average pay and they require average training. The jobs at the bottom of the list typically don't pay very well. I'm going to give you one exception. Typically don't pay very well, and they typically don't require a lot of training either. So I want to give you one of the jobs in the middle of the list that's a little bit surprising. Well, professional athlete. And because when we think of professional athletics, we think of Major League Baseball players, people in the NBA, people in the NFL. And look, those people, millionaires, right? They just, what Major League Baseball, what is it, like 3.5 million, something like that is the average amount of money that people are making. I mean, if I had to live on that, I guess I would, right? Wouldn't we all sacrifice and live on 3.5 million if we had to? But here's the part that we forget. There's an awful lot of professional athletes who are paid by Nike and others, um, who really just pay. So track athletes, right? They're really just getting enough money to live on. I'll give you another one. We have a baseball team in Schaumburg called the Schaumburg Boomers. And look, these are really good baseball players, and they're professional, meaning that they're getting paid to play. They're only making 2 or 3 thousand a summer, right? I mean, so on the one hand, congratulations, you are a professional athlete. On the other, you're not going to get rich doing this. So that's why professional athletes end up in the middle of the list. I want to give you the job toward the bottom of the occupational prestige ranking list that I just love talking about. It's garbage collector. And they don't have a fancy title. They're not environmental, specialists, or it's just garbage collector. And look, garbage collectors make really good money. And I'll tell you why. They have a really good union. In New York several years ago, in July, it was July or August, it was the middle of summer, the garbage collectors union wanted more money, and the city of New York said, we're not going to give you any more money. So they went on strike in New York City in the middle of summer for over 2 weeks. And the people in New York said, because it smelled so bad, they said, we don't care what you pay them, get them back to work. So across the country, garbage collectors make pretty good money, right? So why are they at the bottom of the list? Well, you know why they're at the bottom of the list. They work with garbage, right? So I have to tell you, if I ever stop the teaching biz, I might become a garbage collector just because it's probably a raise for what I'm making right now. Yeah, and then what do you tell people you do? You know what? If you're getting paid, tell them you're a garbage collector, right? Who cares? Who cares what anybody else thinks? But look, on our list, we also have jobs around lives on public aid. So when I was talking earlier about the underclass, living on public aid is the underclass. And I said, sometimes people are working part-time and they're kind of bouncing public aid, not public aid. In Illinois, it's TANF, Assistance for Needy Families. That's what we call public aid here. This is really what we're talking about, right? So again, these part-time jobs that don't require a lot of job skills, don't have benefits, difficult to raise a family, if not almost impossible to raise a family on these incomes. So this is on our list. This is where the underclass kicks in. All right, we're nearing the end. I try to keep these short. there's two kinds of poverty I want you to be able to differentiate between. I want you to be able to differentiate between absolute poverty and relative poverty. Let's talk about the second one first. Here in the United States, we we essentially have relative poverty. And what we mean by that is you're in poverty compared to everyone else. So here in the US, um, people in poverty do have access to some resources. Look, some people choose to live off the grid, right? Um, it's a tough way to go. We see homelessness in all kinds of places. We don't see homelessness at O'Hare anymore. Mayor Daley kicked them out. But underneath several overpasses and bridges in the city of Chicago, we continue to see encampments. Right? I mean, we have in places like Crystal Lake and some others, we have tent cities. Right? That they have their own rules and they have agreements with the local authorities, and and there's kind of an agreement that look, if you stay out of people's business in town, then we'll overlook that you're living here. So so there's all kinds of stuff going on with this, but you still do have some access to resources here in the US. It's not a great way to go. And I'll give you another one. Education has done a much better job the last decade or two regarding relative poverty and homelessness. And what I mean by that is we know in K through 12, well, college too, we no longer tell teachers who in their class is homeless. And part of the reason behind that is we don't want anyone having in the back of their head thinking, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so maybe you don't give any additional assistance to that child because you're thinking, well, it's not going to help anyway. So education's done a little bit better job with that, right? By not telling teachers who might be homeless in their class. And so, so hopefully, and look, I think teachers do want to help everybody. So, when we're talking about a bias, a subconscious bias, this is really the kind of thing that people are talking about is that if you know someone is homeless, maybe your subconscious bias as well, I'm not going to work as hard with this kid. If you were to ask that teacher if they would work as hard with this kid, I think they would say yes, but maybe they don't in reality, right? Because of that implicit or unconscious bias. Absolute poverty is different. We see absolute poverty in third world countries, as we're going to talk in the next chapter, chapter 10. A lot of times, agrarian societies, right, that are living off of the land, when there are natural disasters are tough for everyone, right? We've seen this in NOLA in New Orleans several years ago, and New Orleans has, for anyone who's been there, it is not fully recovered. There are still homes. If you go into parts of town that they haven't gotten to yet, there are homes on cement blocks. Would you want to live in a house on a cement block? And when you see it, it's a little scary because your first thought is that could fall, right? So they're still dealing with it, and that was more than a decade ago. So we still have issues with this in the United States, but it's still relative poverty. In agrarian cultures, if there's a drought or a flood or an earthquake, it's not that you don't have food to eat and someone else does. No one has food to eat. That's absolute poverty, right? So it's not that you're poor, but you're a block away from people who are rich. There's nothing there, right? There's just absolutely nothing there. Puerto Rico is definitely not a third world country, still dealing with the hurricane from a couple of years ago, right? I mean, there's still power outages there. So, and again, this is Puerto Rico is not a third world country, right? There's parts that are clearly agrarian, but still dealing with the infrastructure issues. So just imagine those infrastructure issues when there is no infrastructure, right? So that's what absolute poverty is. You're not eating, no one's eating because there's no food. So let's talk about the poverty line. The poverty line in this country, someone, I don't know who this person is, someone figures out what it costs to eat a nutritional meal for a year, and well, three a day, I guess. And they're not talking about fresh fruits and vegetables. They're talking about the 17-cent mac and cheese at Walmart, right? So those are the kinds of foods that they're talking about. And they triple that food number, and that becomes the poverty line. The poverty line becomes very important. A lot of services that are offered deal in percent. So someone at double or 100% of the poverty line have access to these services. But if you're at 200% or if you're at 110% of that, then you don't have access. So there are some systemic issues in the system related to the poverty line where people really are encouraged not to work or to work less because they'll lose resources, right? And it's just a piece that when you come from a middle class or an upper middle class home, it's just so difficult to understand, right? You just think, well, just make more money, right? But then you have people thinking, well, if I make more money, then I lose out on healthcare, I lose out on these other resources. So this is a big part of what our issue is. All right, two more things today. Feminization of poverty. There was a story here in the Northwest Burbs 3 years ago, 4 years ago, which means it could be 10 years ago. The years blend together. A young mother had an interview at Home Depot. Maybe you remember this. And it was wintertime, it was cold outside. So for her interview, and she had a toddler, right? So, or infant or toddler, I don't recall which. And she drove to her interview. She couldn't find anyone to watch her child. And she parked in the parking lot and she left the engine on with the heater running because she needed to go inside for that interview. I'm not saying what she did was the right thing. I just want you to understand the difficult decisions that people in the underclass have to make. Her decision was, do I go to the interview and put my child in harm's way potentially, or do I not go to the interview and there's no chance of getting the job? She made the wrong decision. She went in for the interview. I'm just saying I get it. I'm not saying it's the right decision. I'm just saying I get the conflict that she had. Someone was walking through the parking lot while she was inside for her interview, and they saw a child in the back seat of a car that was running. They waited a couple of minutes, didn't see a parent or an adult come out, so they called 911, right? As they should. Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS got involved. Obviously, the mom didn't get the job. Then she has to deal with all kinds of issues with keeping her child. These are so when we talk about the feminization of poverty, these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. So let's say you're a single mom, and look, most people on poverty, and this may surprise you, most people on poverty are young single mothers, and here's the part that may not surprise you, but young white single mothers are actually the largest contingent of people on welfare in this country. And the reason young single mothers are on welfare, and they're usually on for a couple of years, is they have a lot of things to figure out. So, childcare being one of them. So, if you have a job at a diner and where you take your child for childcare, look, they all have. If your child comes in with a fever, then they send your child home. And so when that happens, you have to call in sick because you don't have anyone else to watch your child. So if you're a waitress at a diner and your boss says, "Look, when you are here, you are awesome, but you miss too many days, the next time you call in sick, I'm going to have to let you go." So look, when you have a child, kids get sick. It's just, particularly kids in daycare, there's just slimy things everywhere when you have a bunch of kids together over the next month or two, your kid is going to get sick again. What do you do? Right? And so it takes a while for people to figure out childcare. It just does. I wish it were easy. It is not easy. Finding someone to watch your child when your child is sick is really difficult. So that's part of our feminization of poverty. The last thing I want to talk about is explaining poverty. So in 1979, a sociologist by the name of William Ryan wrote a book called Blaming the Victim. And in many ways, it changed how sociology viewed, or maybe it helped sociologists start to think about systemic issues as it relates to poverty. So what he said is that it's called blaming the victim because that's what we like to do. So when you had Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor Holmes, and those are difficult places to grow up in, but then you'll have one child who comes out of that environment and they go to Harvard and they get a PhD and they're just, and so then what we like to do is we like to hold them up, right? We hold them up on a pedestal and we say, see, why doesn't everybody else do that? And that's blaming the victim. So if one person makes it and tens of thousands of don't, well, maybe we need to retake a look at the math. And so maybe we need to take a harder look and blame the system, right? So if only one person is making it, maybe there's things within that system that we need to change. Look, we knew we needed to get rid of Robert Taylor and Cabrini Green, and we have. Um, Unfortunately, when those were torn down, a lot of people found out on Friday that they were moving on Monday, and they didn't have a chance to deal with anything. Again, that's the lack of power, the lack of control over your life. So when we talk about systemic issues, we're talking about blaming the system, right? So again, if one person makes it and 10,000 don't, that sounds like a system issue to me, right? So we can hold the one person up on a pedestal, but what are some resources that we can put in there to help the other 10,000 people get their success as well? So I want you to understand the difference between blaming the victim and blaming the system. Blaming the victim says that we hold the one person up and we're like, oh my gosh, look at this. And it is awesome when someone does it. But at the same time, when we're holding this person up, we're kind of shunning the other, saying, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you just needed to work a little harder, right? So maybe instead of saying that, maybe we say, hey, it's great that this one person made it, but we need to make some changes so that more people can make it, right? So blaming the victim, blaming the system. So this is chapter 9. The next chapter, chapter 10, we're taking the same conversation with stratification. And instead of talking about person to person, we're talking about country to country, right? So we'll talk about high income countries, middle income countries, and low income countries, and how that plays itself out. You guys have a tremendous day. I will see you soon.